The silence in the courtroom was so thick that the hum of the air conditioner sounded like distant thunder. Judge Thompson, a man with a red face and impeccable robe, leaned over the microphone, his voice heavy with disbelief, bordering on mockery. "Miss, do I understand correctly? You are claiming that Clause 4.7 of the merger agreement, drafted in simplified Mandarin, is void because it violates a principle of international maritime law that is only recognized in dialects of southern Italy?" Kira, standing before the court, felt the weight of all eyes on her, but maintained her upright posture. The opposing counsel, Dr. Evelyn Reed, an imposing figure from New York's oldest law firm, smiled disdainfully. The case was a multi-billion-dollar dispute involving two of the world's largest logistics companies, and Kira, a young black lawyer of 26, stood there alone, facing a team of 12 lawyers. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Kira replied, her calm, clear voice cutting through the air like glass, "I am not alleging. I am stating, and to be more precise, the principle is codified in Article 14 of the 1942 Navigation Code, which, as Your Honor must know, was partly influenced by mercantile customs of the Calabria region, where the dialect in question is still spoken. Clause 4.7, in its literal translation from Mandarin, establishes a waiver of liability that is contra bonos mores under that interpretation. And yes, Your Honor, I speak 9 languages." Judge Thompson let out a short, dry laugh that echoed through the room. He stared at her over his gold-rimmed glasses, the laugh turning into a look of irritation. 9 languages. How impressive. But here, miss, we speak the law, and the law in this court is in English. Your statement is absurd and borders on contempt. Where is your supervisor? Who authorized you to present such an argument? The public humiliation was palpable, but Kira didn't look away. At that moment, the pain of that contempt mingled with the memory of years of sacrifice. "My name is Kira, and the only thing separating me from misery was my mind. I grew up in a neighborhood where people spoke more with their hands than with their mouths, where opportunities were as rare as snow in July. My mother worked 3 jobs, and I knew that the only way to break the cycle was through knowledge. Each language I learned wasn't a hobby. It was a key, a weapon, a bridge to a world that tried to keep me out. Mandarin, Italian, Arabic, Russian, Swahili. Each one was a shield against the judgment and the barrier I faced now. The conflict wasn't just about the contract. It was about Dr. Reed, who had been my mentor for a brief and cruel period before dismissing me with the phrase, "You're smart, Kira, but you lack pedigree. This world isn't for you." She had stolen my original research on the intersection of linguistic law and international contracts, the same research she was now using to destroy my client's case. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, ready to deliver the final blow, to reject Kira's motion, and thus nullify the only chance of justice for his client. "Miss Kira," he began, his voice returning to its cold, authoritative tone, "the court cannot accept an argument based on an obscure dialect and a 1942 code. Your motion is—" Kira interrupted him, something she would never do under normal circumstances, but the urgency outweighed protocol. "Your Honor, before you deliver your decision, allow me just one question for Dr. Reed. A single question, in one of my 9 languages." The judge hesitated, intrigued by the audacity. Dr. Reed, confident of her imminent victory, nodded, a condescending smile on her lips. She didn't speak Italian, much less the Calabrian dialect. Kira turned to Dr. Reed, and with perfect pronunciation and an accent reminiscent of the streets of Reggio Calabria, fired off a complex, rapid sentence in the dialect. Dr. Reed paled, her smile vanished, and she stammered a completely out-of-context response in English. Judge Thompson frowned, confused. Dr. Reed's answer made no sense. Kira then turned to the judge and translated the question she had asked. "I asked Dr. Reed if she had read Appendix C of my dossier, which contains the transcript of the recorded conversation where she admits to plagiarizing my thesis. Judge Thompson's face turned livid. Dr. Reed was in a panic, looking at her team, who now seemed equally shocked. The courtroom, once silent, was now teeming with murmurs. Kira had just exposed Dr. Reed's weakness and, more importantly, had planted the seed of doubt in the judge's mind. If you're enjoying how Kira is turning the tables, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Judge Thompson banged his gavel forcefully, but not to end the case. He looked at Kira, the scorn replaced by a disturbing caution. He needed time to understand what had just happened, to verify the validity of that Appendix C, and even more so, to process the audacity and depth of the young lawyer's knowledge. Dr. Reed, for her part, desperately tried to compose herself, but the fear in her eyes was undeniable. What would Kira do now that she had exposed the wound, and how would she use the other 8 languages to dismantle her former mentor's empire of lies? Judge Thompson called a 24-hour recess, citing the need to review the new material presented by Kira. In reality, he needed time to cool off, and more importantly, to verify the authenticity of Appendix C. The mention of a plagiarism confession recording made in an obscure dialect was a masterstroke that destabilized the entire court. Kira left the courtroom under the withering gaze of Dr. Evelyn Reed, the senior attorney. With her high-fashion suits and shark-like reputation, was the personification of the system Kira struggled to penetrate. Evelyn wasn't just an adversary, she was the wall preventing Kira from reaching her potential. Evelyn's story was one of a relentless rise, paved with the exploitation of younger, less connected talent. She was known for adopting promising interns, extracting their brightest ideas, and then discarding them before they could become a threat. In Kira's case, the betrayal ran deeper. Evelyn had promised Kira a partnership, a path to the legal elite, in exchange for her undivided dedication to comparative international law research. Naive and desperate for a chance, Kira handed over her doctoral dissertation, the work of 5 years, which detailed the legal vulnerabilities in international contracts that Evelyn was now exploiting. When Kira confronted Evelyn about the misuse of her work, the response was cold and direct. "You have no way to prove it. And even if I did, who would believe the word of a girl from the inner city against mine?" The conflict, which began as a contractual dispute, transformed into a personal battle for integrity and recognition. Kira's client, a small family-owned logistics company being crushed by the giant represented by Evelyn, was merely the battlefield. The real war was between the meritocracy Kira represented and Evelyn's entrenched privilege. That night, Kira didn't sleep. She was in her small apartment, transformed into a crisis headquarters. Appendix C was real, but the recording wasn't in Calabrian. It was in Arabic, one of the 9 languages she mastered. The Calabrian phrase in court was bait, a calculated bluff to disorient Evelyn. And by time, Evelyn's true confession, accidentally captured during a video call Kira recorded for note-taking purposes, was buried in a 40-minute audio file where Evelyn, in a moment of arrogance, had boasted of her maneuver in a conversation with a partner in the Middle East. The challenge was now twofold. First, to ensure that Judge Thompson did not reject Appendix C as planted evidence, and second, to translate and authenticate the Arabic recording irrefutably. Evelyn, for her part, was mobilizing all her resources. She knew Kira had something, but she didn't know what. The mention of the Italian dialect had led her to a false lead, and now she was frantically trying to figure out which of Kira's 9 languages would be the next to be used against her. Evelyn, in her luxurious office overlooking Manhattan, was on a conference call with her team. Her voice was a venomous whisper. "Find out everything about this girl. Every step, every article she's written, every language she actually speaks. She can't have 9. It's an exaggeration. It's a tactic. Find her weakness. She has to have one. What Evelyn didn't understand was that Kira's weakness was also her greatest strength, the need to prove her worth in a world that underestimated her. What Evelyn would see as a resource deficit, Kira saw as the freedom to operate outside the rules of the game. While Evelyn was looking for a procedural error, Kira was weaving a web of linguistics and comparative law that would involve not only the contract, but Evelyn's own career. Kira looked at the clock. There were only a few hours left until the recess ended. She had to prepare her next move, one that would use a language Evelyn would never expect, and that would turn the judge's doubt into certainty. What would be the next language to be used, and how would it fit into Kira's plan to expose the truth undeniably? The recess was over, and the courtroom was even more crowded. News of the young lawyer who had challenged the legal elite with an obscure Italian dialect had spread like wildfire. Judge Thompson, visibly tense, opened the session. "Miss Kira," he began, his voice deep, "the court has reviewed what is called Appendix C. It is an unfiled document without a certified translation and presented irregularly. Dr. Reed claims it is a fabrication and demands that the court disregard it. What is your response?" Dr. Evelyn Reed, recovered from the initial shock, was on the attack. She stood up, her confidence restored, and fired back. "Your Honor, this is a desperate tactic. Miss Kira is trying to deflect attention from her inability to refute the merits of our case. She doesn't even have a certified translator for the dialect she quoted. I ask that the court censure her and proceed with rejecting the motion." The problem intensified. Kira couldn't simply present the recording in Arabic. She needed a legal and irrefutable bridge. Judge Thompson was about to agree with Evelyn. He looked at Kira, expecting confirmation of her defeat. Kira took a deep breath. She knew the next move had to be perfect. It wasn't time to bluff, but to deliver undeniable proof, even if language was a barrier. She needed something that would validate Appendix C and at the same time expose Evelyn's bad faith. "Your Honor," Kira said, ignoring Evelyn's provocation, "Dr. Reed is right on one point. The law demands precision, and precision is at the heart of my motion. The problem with Clause 4.7 is not just the waiver of liability, but the way it was inserted into the original contract. It was added as a last-minute addendum, disguised as a footnote, and written in a language that the weaker party had no way of understanding." Kira turned to Evelyn's desk and pointed to the original contract. "Dr. Reed claims the clause is valid because it was signed, but the signature was obtained under linguistic duress. The addendum is not in simplified Mandarin, as she claims. It is in Cyrillic Russian, handwritten and signed by one of my client's company directors, who only speaks Portuguese and English." The room fell into an even deeper silence than before. Judge Thompson picked up the contract and examined the footnote. It was tiny, almost illegible, but undeniably in Cyrillic. Evelyn Reed turned pale, but quickly tried to compose herself. "Absurd! The contract was reviewed by translators. This is a pen mark, an irrelevant note," Evelyn shouted, breaking protocol. Kira didn't flinch. "Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to read the footnote, not in English, but in the language in which it was written, so that the court can appreciate the malicious intent behind it." Judge Thompson hesitated. He didn't speak Russian. He looked at Evelyn, who was visibly shaken. The decision was risky. Allowing Kira to speak in a foreign language again could be seen as a loss of control by the court, but prohibiting her would be denying the analysis of material evidence. "Go ahead, Miss Kira," said the judge, his voice a mixture of frustration and fascination. "But the court will require an immediate translation." Kira turned to Evelyn and then to the judge. She began to read the footnote in impeccable Russian, with the cadence of a native, her voice laden with authority. The sentence was short, but devastating. Я знаю, что это не имеет юридической силы, но они подпишут. Это наша страховка. Kira then translated, looking directly at the judge. The note says, I know this has no legal validity, but they will sign it. It's our insurance. Your Honor, this is Dr. Reed's confession of bad faith, written on the document itself. And if Your Honor doubts my translation, I suggest you call a Russian interpreter, but not before I present proof that the handwriting is Dr. Reed's. The problem had escalated from a contractual dispute to a case of procedural fraud and bad faith. Kira's decision to use Russian to expose the handwriting was the turning point. She not only proved that Evelyn was lying about the language, but also presented evidence of criminal intent. Judge Thompson was now at a crossroads. Ignore the evidence or open an investigation that could bring down one of the most powerful lawyers in the city. Judge Thompson banged the gavel, but this time, the sound was one of panic. He needed more than a recess. He needed a strategy. Evelyn Reed, for her part, was now desperate. She knew Kira had more, and that the next language could be the final blow. How would Kira prove that the Russian handwriting was Evelyn's? And what would be the next step in dismantling the web of lies that Dr. Reed had built? The new recess, this time for 48 hours, was a tense truce. Evelyn Reed used the time to try to discredit Kira, claiming that the young lawyer had forged the Russian handwriting. She hired a renowned handwriting expert who, for a considerable sum, was ready to testify that the handwriting was inconclusive and therefore could not be attributed to Evelyn. Evelyn's strategy was clear. Without proof of authorship, the Russian handwriting would be just an irrelevant curiosity. Kira, however, was one step ahead. She knew that traditional expert analysis would be easily manipulated or challenged. Her preparation did not focus on counter-experts, but on a secret strategy that used Evelyn's own arrogance against her. Kira's plan involved her eighth language, Swahili. Years earlier, during the brief period she worked for Evelyn, Kira had noticed a peculiar detail. Evelyn, who boasted about her collection of African art, had an obsession with a Swahili proverb that she had engraved on a brass plate on her desk. Akili ni mali, intelligence is wealth. Evelyn, however, did not speak the language. She had copied the proverb from a book and, in a moment of carelessness, asked Kira to transcribe it into her personal diary so that she could practice her calligraphy. Kira not only transcribed the proverb, but also subtly taught Evelyn a variation of the letters A and L that are common in old Swahili coastal manuscripts, a peculiarity that Evelyn unknowingly incorporated into her writing when she was relaxed or distracted. This variation was her secret code of authenticity. Kira's plan was as follows: the handwriting test. Upon returning to court, Kira would present a series of documents from Evelyn, such as meeting notes and draft letters, all containing the Swahili proverb annotation. She wouldn't need an expert. She would use Evelyn herself as a witness. The linguistic connection. Kira would argue that the Russian annotation and the Swahili proverb shared the same unique handwriting signature, a variation that could only have been learned and practiced by Evelyn. The final blow. Once the authorship of the Russian annotation was established, Kira would have the legal basis to introduce the most explosive evidence, the Arabic recording, which proved Evelyn's plagiarism and bad faith in a much broader context. Kira spent the 48 hours reviewing every detail, every nuance of her argument. She knew that Dr. Reed would try to deflect attention, attack her credibility, and question the relevance of Swahili. But the beauty of the strategy lay in its simplicity. It wasn't proving that Evelyn spoke Russian or Swahili. It was proving that Evelyn wrote in a way that only she could, and that this writing incriminated her. If you've been following Kira's journey and admire how she uses knowledge to uncover the truth, consider subscribing. After all, information is our greatest weapon. and you won't want to miss the moment when Kira's secret strategy is revealed. As she prepared to return to court, Kira picked up Evelyn's diary, which she had kept as evidence, and flipped through it to the page with the Swahili proverb. Evelyn's handwriting, with the subtle variation of the A and the L, was unmistakable. She smiled. The trap was set. Judge Thompson and Dr. Reed were about to witness the power of a mind that wasn't limited to a single language or a single system of rules. What would happen when Kira confronted Evelyn with her own handwriting, and how would Swahili become the key to unlocking the truth behind the Russian and the Arabic? The courtroom was tense. The handwriting expert hired by Evelyn Reed, Dr. Alistair Finch, was in the witness box, ready to deliver the blow that would nullify Kira's Russian evidence. In your professional opinion, Dr. Finch, asked Evelyn's lawyer, can the Cyrillic writing in Clause 47 be unequivocally attributed to Dr. Evelyn Reed? No, replied Finch, with the confidence of someone who was well paid. The sample is minuscule, and the characteristics are inconclusive. Anyone with a basic knowledge of the Cyrillic alphabet could have made the writing. It's impossible to determine authorship. Judge Thompson sighed, looking ready to end the matter. Evelyn smiled, a glint of triumph in her eyes. It was Kira's turn. She stood, but didn't address the expert. She addressed the judge. Your Honor, I request permission to present new evidence that establishes Dr. Reed's handwriting pattern. This is not a legal annotation, but a personal writing pattern she developed over the years. The judge, intrigued, allowed it. Kira then projected a series of documents onto the courtroom screen. Meeting, notes, draft letters, and finally a page from Evelyn's diary. All contained the same phrase, Akili ni mali, intelligence is wealth. Dr. Finch, Kira asked calmly, can you identify a peculiar and repetitive characteristic in the way Dr. Reed writes the letters A and L in her cursive handwriting present in all these samples? Finch hesitated, forced to analyze what seemed to be an irrelevant distraction. Yes, there is a slight slant and a final stroke that is unusual, but not unique. Unusual, but not unique, Kira repeated. And can you confirm that this peculiarity is present in the Cyrillic Russian handwriting, despite the difference in alphabet? Kira projected the Russian handwriting and the Swahili phrase side by side. The entire court could see the undeniable similarity in the stroke. The same slant, the same finish. It was Evelyn's calligraphic signature, unconsciously transferred to another alphabet. Judge Thompson leaned forward. Evelyn was livid, gesturing frantically to her lawyer. Your Honor, Kira continued, Dr. Reed doesn't speak Swahili, but she practiced writing that sentence for years. That practice created a unique motor pattern that manifested itself in the Russian handwriting. Dr. Finch may not be able to prove that the handwriting is hers, but I can prove that the peculiarity of the handwriting is hers, and that peculiarity is the same one that appears in the Russian handwriting that says, I know this has no legal validity, but they're going to sign it. It's our insurance. The first twist. Judge Thompson, convinced by the irrefutable logic of the comparative handwriting, banged the gavel. The court accepts the Russian handwriting as proof of bad faith on the part of Dr. Reed. Proceed, Miss Kira. Evelyn Reed was in total panic. She knew what was coming next. Meritíssimo, disse Kira. Agora que a má-fé da doutora Reed está estabelecida, a corte deve considerar a origem dessa má-fé. Eu apresento a gravação de áudio, o verdadeiro apêndice C, que a doutora Reed tentou desesperadamente descreditar. Kira tocou o áudio. A voz de Evelyn Reed preencheu a sala, falando em árabe fluente com um colega. O juiz Thompson não entendia, mas o tom era inconfundível, arrogante, conspiratório. Meritíssimo! O áudio tem 40 minutos, mas eu traduzi e transcrevi o trecho mais relevante, onde a doutora Reed confessa ter plagiado minha tese de doutorado, que é a base para toda a sua argumentação neste caso. Ela diz, a pesquisa de Kira é brilhante, mas ela não tem os meios para publicá-la. Eu a usei e agora ela é minha. Ela não pode me tocar. Eu sou intocável. A segunda reviravolta. O juiz Thompson, que havia rido de Kira no início, agora estava paralisado. O plágio e a fraude eram crimes éticos e legais que destruiriam a carreira de Evelyn. Mas Kira não parou por aí. Meritíssimo, disse Kira, olhando para Evelyn, que estava prestes a desmaiar. A doutora Reed não apenas roubou minha tese, ela a usou para criar um esquema de evasão fiscal internacional para a empresa que ela representa, um esquema que só é possível devido a uma brecha que eu identifiquei em um tratado comercial entre os Ipassim-Eia e a Tanzânia. E essa brecha só pode ser explorada se a documentação for redigida em Swahili, o nono idioma que eu falo. Kira, então, apresentou um documento, redigido em Swahili, que provava o esquema de evasão fiscal. Evelyn Reed não havia roubado apenas uma tese. Ela havia roubado um mapa para um crime financeiro. O juiz Thompson olhou para Kira, depois para Evelyn, e finalmente para o documento em Swahili. Ele estava sem palavras. A jovem advogada negra, que ele havia ridicularizado por falar 9 idiomas, havia usado 3 deles: o dialeto italiano para o blefe inicial, o russo para provar a má-fé e o Swahili para expor o crime financeiro, para desmantelar um império de corrupção. O que o juiz Thompson faria agora? Ele tinha uma confissão de plágio em árabe, uma prova de má-fé em russo e a evidência de um crime financeiro em Swahili. A doutora Reed estava acabada, mas a magnitude do caso havia se expandido para além de uma simples disputa contratual. O que Kira exigiria como reparação e como o juiz agora, humilhado, reagiria ao poder da verdade. Judge Thompson, after a moment of stunned silence, finally found his voice. He didn't laugh. He was pale, the disbelief of before, replaced by a deep, bitter recognition. He had underestimated Kira in every possible way. "The court declares recess," he said. His voice choked, and requests the immediate presence of the federal prosecutor to investigate the allegations of tax fraud and plagiarism presented by Ms. Kira. The resolution was swift and satisfactory. Dr. Evelyn Reed was immediately suspended from practicing law and subsequently indicted. The original contractual dispute case was resolved in favor of Kira's client, with Clause 4.7 declared void due to proven bad faith. Evelyn's empire crumbled under the weight of her own arrogance and Kira's 9 tongues. For Kira, the victory was more than professional. It was a transformation. She, no longer the young inner-city lawyer who needed to prove her worth. She was the lawyer who had dismantled one of the most powerful figures in New York corporate law. Public humiliation turned into public triumph. The moral lesson was powerful. Knowledge is true wealth, and integrity is the only currency that truly matters. Evelyn had tried to use privilege to crush merit, but Kira used merit to expose privilege. Months later, Kira was no longer in her small apartment. She had founded her own law firm, specializing in comparative international law and corporate ethics. Her first client was the same one she had defended, and the success of the case catapulted her to stardom. Judge Thompson, in a rare public appearance, made a point of formally apologizing to Kira, acknowledging that her bias had almost cost justice. Kira was in her new office, gazing at the Manhattan skyline. She felt no vengeance, but rather a profound sense of peace. She had proven that true strength lies not in power or pedigree, but in the ability to see the world from multiple perspectives, to speak everyone's language. She picked up a book of Swahili poetry, a gift from her client, and smiled. Intelligence was indeed wealth. If you were inspired by Kira's story and believe in the power of education and perseverance, subscribe to the channel. Together we can continue to celebrate stories where merit and intelligence triumph over adversity.